I'm Erik Townsend in the MacroVoices studios. This video was produced in June 2019. Its purpose is to bring you a perspective on the coming digital currency revolution that you won't find anywhere else. The target audience is the Sand Hill Road venture capital community and others who are interested in understanding the big picture of where digital currency is ultimately headed in the long run, who the big winners will be, and what it will mean to the world. I'll cover Facebook's Libra announcement and why I think it's cause for serious concern. And then I'll go on to explain how I believe the digital currency revolution is likely to play out over the next couple of decades. But first, I want to explain why I don't think that blockchain-based cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are likely to play a meaningful role in the digital currency revolution beyond the important one that they've already played. So let's start there before moving on to Facebook's Libra and the long-term outlook. I predict that digital currency will change the world we live in so profoundly that even the most visionary pundits will be taken by surprise. I further predict that the digital currency revolution will be at least as big of a deal as the personal computer or the public internet, and I think it will change the lives of every human being on the planet. But here's the ironic part. I do not think that what's coming will look anything like what most of the cryptocurrency community is predicting. Specifically, I think the many crypto enthusiasts who have predicted that Bitcoin will eventually become a major currency in the global financial system are going to be sorely disappointed. I'll explain why in just a moment. Meanwhile, the financial community remains largely out of touch with what digital currency is really going to mean to the future of the global financial system. Some investment professionals have become obsessed with cryptocurrencies and are even launching institutional investment vehicles for crypto, while others are naysaying crypto as a fad they hope will soon be forgotten. In my opinion, almost all of them are getting the story wrong. They're focusing on the wrong things and missing the real story. So, who the hell am I and why should anyone care what I think? In my first career, I was a technologist and entrepreneur in the software industry. Specifically, I was a distributed systems architect, which means that I'm very familiar with the underlying software technologies which make digital currency systems possible. And I was pretty good at my job when I was a distributed systems expert. Good enough to have cashed out and sold my software company back in 1998, making enough money to retire at the age of 33. But like almost everyone who tries to retire in their early 30s, I eventually got bored, flunked retirement, and went on to run a MacroStrategy hedge fund for 5 years. Specifically, my investment research for the last decade has focused on reserve currencies and the many reasons that the international monetary system is likely to go through a major reset in coming years after the central bankers paint themselves into a monetary policy corner there's no way out of. So my first career was all about understanding how the technology that underpins digital currency works, and my second career was focused on understanding why the international monetary system needs an overhaul, and why central bank policy since the GFC is likely to eventually force a major reset of the IMS. My background in both distributed systems and in understanding the international monetary system gives me a very clear vision of where I'm convinced digital currency is ultimately headed. And it's anything but a consensus viewpoint. I wrote a book on the subject in 2018, and already many of the predictions I made in that book are coming true. So let's dive right in. Without a doubt, Bitcoin is where it all started. Just like the Wright Flyer, the world's first airplane, Bitcoin marks the invention of something brand new that is going to change the world in ways that are difficult for most people to even imagine. But when you visit a commercial airport today, you don't see any Wright Flyers parked out on the tarmac. The Wright Flyer didn't even have a pilot's seat. It was primitive and completely unsuitable for commercial use. But that wasn't the point. The Wright brothers invented powered flight, and that invention was certain to change the world. Today, the Wright Flyer hangs in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C., where it's celebrated as one of the most important inventions in human history. Bitcoin deserves a space right next to it, because the concepts and principles that were first pioneered by Bitcoin and its anonymous designers are going to have just as big of an impact on humanity as the airplane. But it's critically important for investors to understand and be able to distinguish the breakthrough inventions that will change the world for many decades to come from the prototype quality hacks and workarounds that made the first versions of digital currency possible. My contention is that the investment community is presently very confused about these distinctions, so clarifying them is a principal goal of this video. The really revolutionary technology breakthrough which enables digital currency is known generically as permissionless, decentralized, distributed ledger. And it's not just a cool idea or a good invention. In my opinion, it legitimately represents a breakthrough in computer science. Simply put, what's been invented here is the concept of an ownerless database. Now, for the entire history of the computer industry prior to the invention of Bitcoin, it was always assumed that somebody somewhere has to be in charge of any computer database. If we're talking about the ledger data that determines your bank balance, well, it's the bank that owns that database and they're responsible for securing it. If it gets hacked, not only is the bank at risk, but their customers are put at risk as well. So a lot of parties at arm's length are put at risk if whoever owns the database and is responsible for ensuring its security screws up. Before Bitcoin, nobody in the computer industry had figured out how to create a secure, ownerless database where information can be stored securely, but nobody owns it and no one party can hack or alter the data at the expense of others. The digital currency pioneers who created Bitcoin solved a problem that most credentialed computer science experts would have described as unsolvable. It was a truly profound breakthrough in the field of information technology, and its importance cannot be understated. Now, I don't normally use such strong language when describing software technology, but the invention, which is now known as decentralized distributed ledger, is literally as important as the invention of the jet engine. It completely changes the options available to the designers of information systems, just as the turbojet engine completely redefined the range of possibility for aircraft design. It really is that big of a deal, and I can't emphasize that point strongly enough. But here's an even more important point I really want you to take to heart. In the software industry, the first version of just about anything usually sucks. If you're old enough to remember Microsoft Windows version 1.0, it probably isn't a fond memory. That's just the nature of software. Here's how software evolves. We start by trying to solve something nobody ever managed to get to work before. We want to prove that we can make it work. Performance and reliability are not important at that stage. We just want to see if we can get the thing to work at all. Then, once we manage to get it working, we can do a second version that fixes the bugs and improves reliability, and then we can do a third version to make the performance better. That's just the way software evolves. The anonymous inventors of Bitcoin were taking on a much harder problem than building a graphical user interface, so their version 1 product sucks even worse than Microsoft Windows version 1. It's called blockchain, and it's received so much attention and hype that very few investors have a clear understanding of exactly what blockchain is or how it's different from the Bitcoin cryptocurrency itself. Let me simplify it. Blockchain is version 1 of decentralized distributed ledger, an invention as historically significant as the airplane or the internet. But what investors really need to take to heart is that it's still version 1 of a software system, and quite frankly, it sucks just as much as Microsoft Windows version 1 did. Blockchain is an incredibly inefficient design, and the result is extremely poor performance. The problem is that blockchain relies on an extremely inefficient algorithm called proof of work in order to prevent the bad guys from taking over the network. Now, don't get me wrong. The inventors of Bitcoin were nothing short of genius intellect, and they were trying to achieve something nobody had ever achieved before. So any design that worked at all was a terrific success. And as I said earlier, this is just how the software development process works. You start by focusing on getting new ideas to work at all, and then you worry about how to do it right. Here's the really important thing that I want you to remember. Right here, right now, in 2019, we're on the verge of a really profound breakthrough that will change everything and allow the digital currency revolution to really kick into high gear. I call it breaking the proof of work barrier. In other words, What we really need is a better version of permissionless, decentralized, distributed ledger that doesn't suck as badly as blockchain sucks. Specifically, we need something that does the same thing as blockchain, but we need to do it thousands of times faster and more efficiently than blockchain. The key to that is figuring out a way to design a distributed ledger that doesn't require the inefficient proof-of-work design in order to keep the network safe. You've probably heard about mining in cryptocurrencies, and if you heard about it from one of the people mining crypto for a living, they probably described it as the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm afraid I have some bad news for them. Mining is not a good thing, and it never was a good thing. The fact that cryptocurrencies even need to have miners in order to function is a serious design deficiency, not a feature. And that design deficiency was the direct and entirely necessary result of the fact that nobody could figure out a way to make distributed ledger work securely without resorting to a really crazy design that literally pits miners in a contest with one another to see who can waste more energy and computer resources than anyone else in the shortest period of time. That really is how it works. I'm certainly not alone in believing that it would be far better to eliminate mining and proof of work entirely and figure out how to make a digital cash system work securely and efficiently without the need for miners and without the extremely wasteful, inefficient design of blockchain. All of the smartest guys in the crypto space have been trying to solve this problem for a good solid decade now, and they're finally having some success. The proof of work barrier had already been broken years ago in the form of something known as a permissioned distributed ledger. The XRP Ledger cryptocurrency, formerly known as Ripple, uses a permissioned distributed ledger, and as a direct result, it's able to process more than 10 times as many transactions per second as any blockchain-based cryptocurrency. But a permissioned distributed ledger design requires at least some degree of centralization. Remember that one of the highest priorities of the cryptocurrency crowd is to make their digital currency systems nearly impervious to government oversight and control. So for them, a centralized design is out of the question. The reason that cryptocurrencies have continued to use blockchain for all these years, despite its many serious deficiencies, is very simple. So far, nobody had figured out a way to make distributed ledger work without those deficiencies while still keeping the design completely decentralized. But just as I predicted in my book, all of that is changing. Already, several companies claim to have solved this engineering challenge, and they claim that their products already offer truly decentralized, permissionless distributed ledger functionality without the abysmal performance and reckless waste of computing resources inherent to blockchain. Hedera Hashgraph is one such example, and there are several other companies announcing fully decentralized distributed ledger solutions that don't rely on mining or proof of work, and which don't suffer the performance problems inherent to blockchain's design. The reason this is so important is that we finally have the technology needed to engineer scalable digital currency systems that really could stand a chance of becoming major currencies within the global financial system, or someday even replacing the US dollar as the world's global reserve currency. These are things that a blockchain-based cryptocurrency system like Bitcoin could never have hoped to achieve. Put another way, the stage has been set for digital currency to finally scale to a level where digital currency systems could meaningfully compete with conventional currencies for prominence in the global financial system. These advances will pose some serious challenges for the existing blockchain-based digital currencies, such as Bitcoin. But frankly, I don't want to waste any more of your time talking about cryptocurrency. I think the role crypto played in the digital currency revolution is already coming to an end. I don't think crypto is going away. It will be around for a long time. But its importance is going to diminish rapidly. What's important to focus on now is where we're headed next, not how we got here. And I'm convinced that where we're headed next is toward much more scalable digital currency systems, which do not rely on a proof-of-work validated blockchain to secure the network. I want to shift gears now from software technology to monetary systems and talk about global reserve currencies, a subject I've studied quite a bit. A lot of people don't really understand what a global reserve currency is or why it's important. One aspect of it is that it makes sense to choose a standard currency for the settlement of international trade, and the US dollar has served in that role since the end of World War II. But the arguably more important definition of the phrase reserve currency is that it's the currency in which central banks hold their foreign exchange reserves. I go to considerably more detail on the subject in my book. For now, what I want you to understand is that the nation issuing the global reserve currency enjoys an immense artificial demand for its currency because everyone else in the world needs both the reserve currency itself in order to settle international trade, and they also need sovereign bonds denominated in that currency to serve as central bank reserve assets. Way back in the 1950s, economist Robert Triffin explained why global reserve currencies never last forever. See the Wikipedia entry for Triffin Dilemma if you want the gory details. The gist of it is that the country issuing the reserve currency will have the opportunity to borrow and spend recklessly without suffering the immediate consequences that other non-reserve issuer nations would suffer if they tried to do the same thing. The process takes decades to play out, but eventually the reserve currency issuing nation becomes so indebted that other countries no longer trust the creditworthiness of the reserve currency. At that point, the rest of the world abandons the incumbent global reserve currency and chooses a new one. And to be sure, pressure has been building in international circles to reduce dependency on the US dollar as the kingpin of the international monetary system. Part of the reason is America's $21 trillion national debt. But the primary reason that other nations have become frustrated with the dollar's monopoly over reserve currency status centers more on U.S. foreign policy than over-indebtedness. Russia and China have complained for decades that the U.S. derives unfair advantage from being the reserve currency issuer. But now the European Union has taken their side. The U.S. contends that it has jurisdictional authority over any transaction anywhere on the planet that is settled in U.S. dollars. The American government has sanctioned French bank BNP Paribas and has threatened to sanction several European multinational corporations if they do business with Iran, something which is still entirely legal under European law since European nations haven't sanctioned Iran. So already, we can see that there's plenty of frustration in the international community when it comes to the United States controlling the reserve currency for the rest of the world. Meanwhile, history teaches us that reserve currencies usually last about 80 to 100 years, supporting the conclusion that the dollar is nearing the end of its term in office. A lot of economists thought that the dollar would lose its reserve status after the U.S. reneged on its commitment to the Bretton Woods system back in 1971. The so-called petrodollar system, in which oil exporting nations agreed to price their exports in U.S. dollars and to invest the profits in U.S. Treasury bonds, has helped the dollar to maintain the title of global reserve currency for almost 50 years after the so-called Nixon shock of 1971. But now the dynamics of global oil trade are changing, and China has already begun trading a crude oil futures contract priced and settled in yuan rather than dollars. To really understand why digital currency is so ideally suited to eventually replace the dollar as the global reserve currency, it's really important to take a step back and revisit what a reserve currency really is and why we need one. It would never be practical to settle international trade or to keep central bank reserve assets denominated in all of the different national currencies that exist around the world. So for practical reasons, the world has to pick one primary reserve currency. Nobody wants to trust anyone else, but for all of recorded history, there's been no other choice. They had to pick one country they could trust enough to choose as the global reserve currency. Nobody has ever wanted to trust another government to be in charge of the entire world's reserve currency. But given no other choice, history teaches us that the country with the strongest credit and the strongest military usually wins. The critically important thing to understand here is that distributed ledger technology enables a completely new architecture of trust. For the first time, it's possible to engineer a digital reserve currency system which could scale to meet the needs of the global economy without having to trust any one nation to be in charge of it. In fact, it's now possible to design a digital currency system so that by way of intentional design, No country has undue authority over any other country. Put another way, the technology now exists to create a digital currency system which eliminates the need for the entire world to have to trust any single government to be the reserve currency issuer. Central bankers haven't even begun to figure this out yet. Most of them are still confused about the difference between Bitcoin and blockchain. But when they eventually realize the opportunity to replace the US dollar with a digital currency system issued by a consortium of central banks, giving no government undue authority over any other government, it will set up an awkward conflict of interests between the United States and the rest of the world. For the US government, the digital reserve currency system I've described will have no appeal whatsoever. In fact, the U.S. is likely to see it as a threat to U.S. hegemony over the global financial system. But for the entire rest of the world, it would be a very welcome change. Now, I want you to ask yourself, where would this global-scale digital reserve currency system I've described come from? Who's going to build it? And who will have influence over its design? Keep in mind, we're talking about a digital currency system which could very easily evolve to eventually replace the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. So a very important question to focus on is whether the designers of the currency system will have the opportunity to design features into the system that benefit themselves in unobvious ways. Plenty of people in the crypto community would tell you that Bitcoin or one of the other blockchain-based cryptocurrencies will eventually evolve to become the digital reserve currency system that I've described. Frankly, I'm not sure what they're smoking. Please remember that Bitcoin was conceived by the so-called cypherpunk community, and their stated goal was to create an alternative money system which was designed for the express purpose of thwarting the ability of law enforcement to surveil, regulate, and oversee private financial transactions. It's no exaggeration to say that Bitcoin was literally designed for the purpose of annoying governments and preventing them from doing things that people who work in government believe to be not just their jobs, but their duty to their country. Now, just for the record, I personally think that government has far too much control over our lives. So on many levels, I'm personally rooting for the cryptocurrency guys. But I'm also a realist. It is utterly ludicrous to think that a cryptocurrency designed for the express purpose of frustrating and upsetting governments is somehow going to become the new global reserve currency, or even a systemically important alternative currency. Whether the crypto crowd likes it or not, governments are still very much in charge of such matters, and they're not about to adopt Bitcoin for any serious role in the international monetary system. What's far more likely is that they will eventually outlaw Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies entirely. And for heaven's sakes, don't believe the hogwash that you'll hear from some crypto diehards about governments supposedly being powerless to outlaw cryptocurrency. That's sheer nonsense. Now, a true statement is that it would be difficult for governments to prevent the Bitcoin network from continuing to exist. So therefore, after it's outlawed, outlaws will continue to use it. But with respect to large-scale adoption as a major currency system, government most certainly does have the ability to stop crypto in its tracks. So let's return to the question of who's going to design and build the digital currency system that really will have a shot at replacing the dollar as the global reserve currency. Governments themselves stand more to gain from digital currency technology than anyone else. But governments are also famously bureaucratic and inefficient. And central bankers haven't even figured out that they stand more to gain than anyone else from the inventions first pioneered by the cypherpunk creators of Bitcoin. But just as I predicted in my book, we're now seeing far more interest in so-called CBDCs, central bank issued digital currencies. In fact, there was just a CBDC conference in Sweden a few weeks before this video was recorded. So the truly powerful influencers, the central bankers, are finally starting to wake up and recognize that they stand more to gain than anyone else from digital currency technology. Someday they'll finally assimilate the big picture and realize the profound benefits of a global digital reserve currency system administered by a consortium of central banks, such that no one nation has undue power or authority over other nations in the international monetary system. But when they do finally wake up, who's going to design and build that state-of-the-art digital currency system? Certainly not the governments themselves. They're famously slow to develop proficiency with any new technology. So if my prediction is that central bankers will eventually wake up and realize that nothing could possibly benefit them more than a global-scale digital reserve currency system, the answer should already be obvious. Silicon Valley is where the talent resides. What I predicted in my book was that major tech interests in the Valley would eventually figure out that if they start working on building a truly global-scale digital currency system now, by the time they get it working well enough that it could actually be suitable as a global reserve currency, by then central bankers will have woken up and figured out how much they want and need a digital reserve currency system. And Facebook's Libra announcement in early June 2019 confirmed my prediction. I just hope Facebook didn't get the idea for Libra from reading my book. I predict that Facebook won't be the last of the Silicon Valley tech giants to announce that they're working on a digital currency system. And I also predict that none of them, including Facebook, will be fully forthcoming about the extent of their long-term plans and aspirations for the new digital currencies that they'll soon be introducing. And this is where we face some really serious challenges. On one hand, I predict that re-engineering money itself will be the technology industry's greatest calling. And by the way, it doesn't end with the currency system. The entire international monetary system is based on a badly flawed and antiquated 500-year-old system known as fractional reserve banking. And for reasons I describe in detail in my book, I believe that the real opportunity that lies before us is to re-engineer the entire fractional reserve system, creating safer, more reliable money and better credit and lending mechanisms, which could deliver profound benefits to society. This is a really, really big deal. Re-engineering money itself will be the tech industry's greatest accomplishment, and it truly offers the opportunity to deliver profound improvements in the way banking and credit work. I mean really, truly monumental benefit to society is possible here if this is done right and special interests don't get in the way. And those special interests are what scare me the most. Look, as a member of the human race, I'd like to be the first to officially go on record as saying that allowing Mark Zuckerberg to be in charge of how the entire planet's money will work in the future is a really, really bad idea. I can't imagine anything worse. And it was no coincidence that Facebook was the first of the tech giants to announce its plans to enter the digital currency arena. What the world urgently needs is for private sector tech concerns to anticipate the need for a global-scale digital currency system, which is literally designed with the express goal of eventually replacing the US dollar as the world's new global reserve currency. They have the technology to start building it right now, and some of them have already figured this out and have started doing exactly that. But we need this new currency system to be designed to keep the best interests of we the people at the center of the design, and never ever design in any secret features which undermine the interests of the people for the benefit of those who designed the system. Should we be trusting Facebook to do the right thing for humanity? Well, let's see. They've never violated our trust or let us down in the past, have they? The fact that Facebook hasn't yet described Libra as having aspirations of eventually becoming the world's global reserve currency is irrelevant. If it isn't already, it will soon become clear to all the major players in Silicon Valley that the next really big thing that will be as big as the internet or the personal computer will be re-engineering money itself. First, a global-scale digital currency system, and then re-engineering the entire fractional reserve banking system and replacing it with something far more robust. Whether Facebook knew and understood all of that when they first began their Libra project isn't really important. They'll figure it out soon enough if they haven't already, and so will all of the other tech giants. So the prediction I'm making right now is that a massive battle between the technology titans over who builds the digital currency system of the future has already begun. Now that Facebook has made their intentions public, it won't be long before the race gains momentum. The giants of Silicon Valley have figured out that the really big prize goes to whoever designs and builds the digital currency system, which will eventually become the backbone of the entire global economy. There's never been a better opportunity for the tech industry to deliver something that profoundly improves society for everyone's benefit. But there's also never been a more ripe opportunity for conflicted interests to game the system for their own advantage. The stakes are incredibly high. But what about the existing cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin? The crypto crowd would tell you that the well-established cryptocurrencies have first-mover advantage over anything new that Facebook or anyone else might introduce, and that they will evolve to become major currency systems. There are several flaws in that reasoning. First and foremost, Bitcoin and most of the other cryptocurrencies were designed with the express goal of frustrating law enforcement and making it impossible for government to monitor, oversee, or control private financial transactions. Governments will never accept such a design as having a place in the international monetary system. And despite the contrary hallucinations of some Bitcoin maximalists, governments are still very much in charge. The next major challenge for blockchain-based cryptocurrencies will be getting rid of the proof-of-work validated blockchain, which will soon be obsolete thanks to the introduction of truly permissionless, fully decentralized distributed ledgers which don't rely on mining or proof-of-work to secure the network. At first glance, it would seem possible to simply upgrade Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies by replacing their blockchain-based ledgers with newer, more efficient designs. And to some extent, that's theoretically possible. But here's the rub. The whole notion of mining and miners was never a good thing. The fact that Bitcoin's blockchain ledger relies on miners who all consume exorbitant amounts of electricity and computational capacity was never a good thing to start with. It is, was, and always has been an unfortunate necessity owing to the fact that until very recently, nobody could figure out how to make a truly decentralized distributed ledger work without miners and mining. An appropriate analogy here is to think of the miners like telephone switchboard operators. When the telephone was first invented, we needed human operators to physically connect your telephone to someone else's telephone by manually plugging a cable in to the jack for your telephone and the other end into the party that you were calling. That only made sense because the telephone switch had yet to be invented. But when it was invented, human operators were completely phased out. We needed miners and the horrifically inefficient proof-of-work design of blockchain for one reason and one reason only, because nobody had yet invented a way to make distributed ledger work without them. We've now solved that problem, and it's time to get rid of mining and miners forever. They serve no useful purpose given what's now possible with the latest and greatest distributed ledger technology. It really is very clear now that we do not need miners or mining in order to make a digital currency system secure. We should therefore do away with them as soon as possible. But as Upton Sinclair famously said, it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding that very thing. And make no mistake, it is the miners who are in control of the Bitcoin network and who will determine its future. How likely do you think they are to recognize that mining itself was an unfortunate necessity that only made sense until somebody invented a better mousetrap, something which has now occurred? So let's return to the question of where the truly global-scale digital currency systems that could literally support the entire global economy are going to come from. My prediction is that it will start with initiatives like Facebook's Libra. It will probably be many years before companies developing these systems will publicly admit their true aspirations to design the money system of the future for the entire planet. They'll start just as Facebook has, by announcing currency systems that are supposedly intended to supplement existing conventional money systems by offering secure, instantaneous payment transactions. They'll use these seemingly innocuous private money systems to build market share and to work the bugs out of their software. But these guys are not stupid. They already know right now, right here in 2019, that the real prize is designing the digital currency system that eventually replaces the US dollar as the world's global reserve currency. Believe me, they're already thinking about how to do exactly that. All of this has the potential to be the tech industry's greatest calling. The amount of benefit that we could deliver to humanity by re-engineering not just money, but the entire fractional reserve banking system, which makes credit and lending possible, is just staggering. But the potential for abuse has never been greater. It will be very interesting to see how this plays out. The opportunities for venture capitalists will be beyond measure. But frankly, from what I've seen thus far, most of the investment community is completely out of touch with where all of this is ultimately headed. There's still an immense amount of misplaced fascination with blockchain-related startups. Now, I should clarify that some people use the phrase blockchain technology to refer to distributed ledger technology generically. But what I want you to understand is that the original blockchain, the one that underpins the Bitcoin cryptocurrency, has no future. Just like the Wright Flyer, Bitcoin and blockchain will be remembered forever because that's where it all started. But just like the Flyer, they belong in a museum. The Boeings and Airbuses of the future will not evolve from blockchain-based cryptocurrencies. They'll be designed by people who don't share the cypherpunks' obsession with designing things to be government-proof. Rather, they'll be designed to be government-friendly, with the express design goal of eventually being sold to the central banking community as the basis for a central bank-issued global digital reserve currency system. Now, I don't expect cryptocurrencies to go away. Their anti-government features will always appeal to a certain demographic, and they'll continue to operate the Bitcoin network long after it's outlawed. But the blockchain-based cryptos won't be where the real action is in coming years for investors. The really big plays will be the companies that are able to see the future clearly and recognize that designing and building a global-scale digital currency system that appeals to central bankers rather than alienating them is where the real money is going to be made. And I don't mind going on record as saying that I am extremely concerned that Facebook appears in some regards to be in the lead at the moment. As I said earlier, re-engineering money itself will be the technology industry's greatest calling, and the result will have a more profound effect on society than the internet or the personal computer. 7 billion human beings on this planet all share a common interest in making sure the likes of Mark Zuckerberg are not put in charge of how money works. I really want to be part of this myself, partly because I truly believe that this will be our industry's greatest calling, and quite frankly because it will also be ridiculously lucrative for investors who are able to see the big picture and understand where all of this is ultimately headed. But those aren't the only reasons that I've become so interested in this space. It's also because I really do feel a civic duty here. We have the chance to do more good for society than almost anyone could imagine. And there's plenty of room to get filthy rich in the process of doing something good for humanity. But I can see the writing on the wall, and the opportunity for abuse has never been greater. The guys who seem to be taking the lead already have a mile-long rap sheet for violations of public trust. I've done quite a bit of thinking about how to design a digital currency system for truly global-scale operation, and I describe a few of my best ideas in my book. For example, something that nobody else seems to be talking about is the critical importance of a digital sovereign bond market in addition to the digital currency system itself. Reserve currency status is all about central bank reserve assets, and that means you can't take the title of reserve currency away from the US dollar until you supply a superior alternative to the US Treasury bond market that offers sufficient depth and liquidity to absorb central bank-sized capital flows. That's no easy undertaking, but as I describe in my book, the technology goes a long way to help make it possible. There are countless opportunities to design features that enable enhanced monetary policy tools for central bankers. My prediction is that this is going to be the secret sauce that you have to get right in order to have a real chance at persuading central bankers that your global scale digital currency system is a better choice than your competitors for the purpose of serving as the entire planet's new reserve currency system. I shut down my hedge fund last year, and I now spend most of my time producing a financial podcast called MacroVoices. It's something I'm passionate about, and I really enjoy doing it. But frankly, it's more of a hobby business than a serious career undertaking. I would enjoy consulting either for firms other than Facebook that are engaged in engineering serious world-scale digital currency systems, or for the VC community that backs them and evaluates new ideas. But I threw my software industry Rolodex away when I sold my own software company and went fishing back in 1998, and because I bootstrapped that company, I never had a network of VC relationships. So one of the reasons I'm producing this video is just to put some feelers out. Now, I'm already financially comfortable and I don't really need to be looking for a job at this point in my life. But quite frankly, doing my part to help make sure that Mark Zuckerberg is not in charge of deciding how money should work in the future isn't just a consulting gig for me. It's something I see as a moral obligation to humanity. I really feel that way. And I really do think that I have a pretty darn solid understanding of this space and where it's headed. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you find my views interesting, I encourage you to check out my book, Beyond Blockchain: The Death of the Dollar and the Rise of Digital Currency. The Kindle and paperback versions are on Amazon, and the audiobook is available at macrovoices.com/BB for Beyond Blockchain. I'd also appreciate it if you'd forward a link to this video to anyone you know who might find it interesting. We the people need to work together in order to keep the process of redesigning how money itself works as far away from Mark Zuckerberg as possible. For the MacroVoices Podcast Network, I'm Erik Townsend. Thanks for watching.